Okay, hello everyone. Welcome back to Wu Can Cook. My name is Wesley. Today we're doing a Chinese egg drop soup that I've been eating since I was a little kid, and it's based off of a recipe that I wrote that's loosely based off of another version of the Westlake soup that you used to be able to get at a restaurant in San Francisco called Dragon House. So if you grew up in the Bay Area in the 90s or maybe the early 2000s, you might have known about this restaurant. I believe it no longer exists. I think it closed down. And I think the two old ladies that used to run it retired. Don't think it got gentrified out of San Francisco. But I do know that I'm pretty sure it's not there anymore. But if you did grow up in the 90s in San Francisco, you would know about Dragon House, which was on maybe 17th and Gary, something like that. And you could get a really great Westlake soup there that was very much based off of the use of ground meat. So very often a Westlake soup, you will see it done with a variety of different proteins. So I know that I have done a Westlake soup, I think I did it on stream actually, with crab. And it is also super common to see it done with things like cod or any other kind of fish really. Definitely crab is super common though. Today I'm going to be doing it with ground beef. I'm going to do it with a super lean ground beef, which is, I think today we're using a 93.7, I think 93%, 93.7 ground beef, which if you're not familiar with how ground meat works, when you see those percentages or you see those numbers, what that's indicating is the fat percentage of ground meat. So when you see something like 80-20 chuck, for example, you'll probably see that term thrown around quite a bit, because that's what you use for a hamburger, which is 80-20 chuck. That's indicating 80% fat, 80% meat, 20% fat. So 80-20 chuck, super fatty. If you have any questions for me, feel free to drop your questions in the comments. I don't know everything about Westlake soup or Chinese food or anything really, but I know lots of stuff, so hopefully I can be helpful or informative or at the least entertaining to watch. So, as with pretty much everything that I cook on stream, this recipe or this version of this Westlake soup has a recipe video that goes along with it. That always lives over on my YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/WuCanCook. If you're watching on YouTube, or if you're watching on Reddit, that would be the YouTube link at the bottom of the screen. If you're watching on YouTube, it's the YouTube channel that you're already on, so you're already there. So if you're interested in more stuff like this and checking out more content like that, I recommend hopping over to YouTube and checking some of that stuff out. No sympathy. Yeah, how's it going, guys? Yeah, totally. So today we're doing a Westlake soup. Really quick, I should probably put this stock on. Today we're doing a Chinese soup called Westlake soup. Loosely, essentially what a Westlake soup is a Chinese egg drop soup. Chinese egg drop soup, but it's got a few more things going on in it. So the big difference to me is that egg drop soup, or at least the Chinese egg drop soup, has very little protein in it. It's mostly just the egg. Whereas the Westlake soup has a whole bunch of protein in it, which I personally love because it makes it super hearty. That's not enough stock. So real quick, what I'm doing is I'm starting a boil on some beef stock. I just noticed that I actually don't have enough stock. The rest of my stock is frozen still, so I'm going to bolster this with a little bit of chicken bouillon. But what we're going for today is we're looking for 4 cups of beef stock and 2 cups of water. So if you're using pure chicken bouillon stock, which I just added a spoonful of, I would use 6 cups of stock. So I ran out of beef stock today, so it'll be okay. So I'm using a little bit of extra water and a spoonful of beef stock. So the reason that I'm starting out with this first is because I know that it is going to take a couple minutes to heat up and bring to a boil. So I'm going to get that started while we talk. So yes, hello to everyone just joining. My name is Wesley, by the way. This is Wu Can Cook. I just said this the first time. Yeah, Wing Wing loves you. Yeah, hello to everyone on YouTube. I'm glad you're tuning in again. That's super cool. Do I have Korean ancestry? No, lots of people ask me that actually. I think it's my haircut. Lots of people ask if I'm Korean. But no, I'm Chinese, Taiwanese American. Which I guess, depending on who you ask, Chinese maybe. But no, I'm not Korean. This is too much ginger. I'm actually going to cut this in half because I think this is too much ginger. Today we're doing a Chinese soup called Westlake soup. I've been eating Westlake soup since I was a little kid. I used to get it at a restaurant in San Francisco called Dragon House. Dragon House is no longer there anymore. But if you're ever in San Francisco in the 90s, you might have come across Dragon House, which was a tiny little Chinese restaurant somewhere around, I think, 17 and Gary, something like that. And you could get really, really good, super authentic Chinese cuisine. Because it was a restaurant run by two old Chinese women. And you could get really, really great Chinese food. So when I was a kid, we used to go there maybe 2-3 times a month. And it was super, super tasty and a big cornerstone to my childhood. So doing the soup, super nostalgic for me because it's basically all of the things that I used to eat when I was a little kid. So. Dragon House, yeah, you know what Dragon House, that's cool, yeah, totally. I'm glad that someone knows what Dragon House was. To me, I actually had to search pretty hard for it on the internet because uh-oh. Oh, shoot. I'm not even gonna mess around with that. Thank you for catching that, though. This stupid GoPro never works properly. I'm just about ready to give up on the GoPro. Going back to the crappy camera. For those watching on YouTube, the reason that we're crowdfunding for money is not because I like doing this for money. I don't really care about making money from streams, and I really will probably never try and make money from streaming. But the reason that I'm trying to gather donations is because that stupid stove cam keeps breaking. So hopefully, if we could raise enough money, we can replace it. I do have a GoPro, but it's busted, and that's actually why. That battery was not low when I first plugged it in. It was at full charge, so I don't know what's going on with it. But hopefully, if we could raise some money, we could replace that stupid stove cam. And yes, but what was I saying? Oh yeah, Dragon House. So in San Francisco back in the 90s, there was a great Chinese restaurant, I believe on 17 and Gary, where you could get some really, really great soup. So I have lots of fond memories of this Westlake soup. I also I've done a couple recipe hacks from Dragon House, actually. I also did their lion's head meatballs, which is coming up soon. I know that I have definitely done it on stream, and it should actually be coming up on YouTube as a recipe, and I think this weekend, this Friday, I think, actually tomorrow. Yeah, actually tomorrow. So I have a Dragon House recipe that's coming up tomorrow for their lion's head meatballs, so it's going to be super, super tasty. Yeah, thank you for catching that. This is the crappier stove cam. So if you'll notice, the coloring is much more grainy, and it looks like a cheap webcam because it's a cheap webcam. All right, cool. Egg foo young, yeah. Actually, so I have been workshopping an egg foo young recipe, but it's kind of tricky. Egg foo young is more deceptively difficult because it's all about texture. But that should hopefully be coming up soon. I've been sort of touching on like Asian breakfast foods lately, so that's going to be super interesting. Egg foo young and then egg, what did they call it? Egg pudding, I think, which is a steamed egg, which is essentially steamed egg, are two of the things that I'm working on right now. All right, so next up, this is 93.7 ground beef, which is extremely lean ground beef. I think it actually is going to be appropriate. I'm mainly using it today because I have a whole bunch of leftover ground beef in the fridge, and I want to use it up. In general, though, I have not been a huge fan of this 93.7 ground chuck, mostly because it doesn't have enough fat, so it's super, super lean. So when I try and use it for pretty much anything, it generally just burns. But I think it will work okay in this soup because we're not really doing much with it. It's just going to go straight into the soup. I am going to marinate it with quite a few things because this is going to be where the majority of our flavor, actually not the majority of our flavor, but all of the flavor that's going to be imparted on our protein is going to live in this marinade. So the majority of our flavor is going to come from our beef stock, which is why it's super important to have a very, very tasty beef stock today. But all of the flavor from our ground meat is coming from this marinade. So we want to be pretty heavy with it. So if you've watched these streams before, you'll know that I have generally tended towards not being super heavy with my meat marinades, because that's usually because in wok stir fries, the sauces in a wok stir fry is already pretty heavy. So frequently, sometimes even I will just like not do a marinade at all, or even sometimes I'll do like a really simple marinade of just like soy sauce and salt. And that's because all of the like heavy ingredients are going into our sauce, which just goes straight into the wok. Today, we're not actually going to use a sauce because we're not doing a wok stir fry. Oops, it's on the wrong camera. Today, we're not actually going to do any sauce because we're not going into a wok stir fry. We're just going in straight into a big pot of stock pot. All of the flavor, it lives in this bowl. So I'm being pretty heavy here. So that was 4 tablespoons of soy sauce, 2 tablespoons of sesame oil, and this is about half a teaspoon of white pepper, which I love in marinades. I made it not too long ago. Yeah, I think maybe last month. I think I made it last month, something like that. I did make it recently. I definitely made it recently with crab, though. Last time I made it on stream, I made it with crab. And the recipe video for it came out maybe last month, I think. I think it came out when I did the stream. The pot's on fire, yeah. Totally. Any ideas for Asian dishes to introduce you to a non-adventurous eater? Yeah, so if you're just getting into like wok cooking and you're not super familiar with like wok flavors, so if you're trying to cook, like just slowly introduce someone to it, what I usually do is just like a really simple like veggie stir fry. So there is actually a recipe for a veggie stir fry on my YouTube channel, and it is very plain. I don't think there's anything super fancy with it. It's mostly just like soy sauce and hoisin sauce. So there's nothing really special about it. And it's like really straightforward. It's a really great introductory to wok stir fries. And it's a great one to just kind of like throw together if you're like don't know what else to do. It's also like really adaptable because it's essentially just veggies. So that's a really good one if you're just getting new to wok cooking. Yeah, hello to everyone just joining. Well, lots of watchers. Looks like we're on Talk Broadcast Live right now on Reddit. My name is Wesley. This is Wu Can Cook. Today we're doing a Chinese soup called Westlake soup. Westlake soup is one of those soups that I grew up eating a lot when I was a kid. The version that we're doing today is based off of a recipe that I wrote, which is loosely in an attempt to reproduce the Westlake soup from a restaurant here in the Bay Area called Dragon House. If you're interested in reproducing this yourself, I would recommend hopping over to our YouTube channel, where all of the recipes for everything that I cook lives. So, including the recipe for this soup. I think we did the recipe for this soup last month, maybe. And those recipes usually talk a little bit slower, generally. And they also have like a little bit more thorough details about like what I'm doing. We kind of like talk through some of the decision making that goes behind some of the things that I do in a recipe, and kind of dives into a lot of that stuff. I have a whole series that's just devoted to reproducing foods from the restaurants in the San Francisco Bay Area. So if you're in the San Francisco Bay Area, I'm in Oakland. So if you're in Oakland or San Francisco, we did a Pad See Ew that was from a restaurant in Oakland called Ni Cha Thai. We also did another. What's coming up? Oh yeah, tomorrow coming up is another Shanghainese meatball dish called Lion's Head Meatball. That's coming up tomorrow. Lots of fun stuff coming up soon. In addition to that, we have another series that's just entirely devoted to... Did I miss that fish sauce? I did miss the fish sauce. And we have another series that's just entirely devoted to Chinese American foods. So I had an entire series that was for reproducing foods from Panda Express. Stuff like that, just kind of deconstructing how Chinese American food works. And kind of taking a look at what are all of the American things that go into Chinese American food. Taking it apart and then removing some of those American ingredients and seeing what Chinese American food looks like when you reassemble it without all of those American qualities. So stuff like that. If you're interested in some content like that, I recommend hopping over to YouTube. That's also where the schedule of everything that I cook lives. So if you're interested in finding out what I'm going to be cooking next, I actually don't know. Most of the time when I do my grocery shopping, I check I check the YouTube channel and see what I'm going to be cooking. Stupid camera. Most of the time when I'm grocery shopping, I check the YouTube channel and see what I'm supposed to be cooking. So if you're interested in finding out what that schedule is going to be, I recommend hopping over to YouTube. Lots of fun stuff going on over there. Do I dry the tofu? Great question. Actually, almost always when you see me using tofu, I will probably put it in a strainer. Usually what I'm doing is using firm tofu, which is a little bit like more solid in structure. So what I'm doing is I'm using super firm tofu, and then I'll throw it into a strainer, and then I'll shake the dickens out of it. So what I'm doing is shaking out all of the water from my tofu. And that's because in a wok fry, we want to avoid as much of that liquid as possible, because when you put liquid into a wok, that's how you end up with low temperatures in a wok. Today, we're not doing a wok stir fry, we're actually just doing a soup. So since we're not actually worried about moisture in our soup, because obviously a soup is just all moisture, I'm not actually going to bother drying it. So that's probably the main reason why I'm not drying it, is because we're not worried about moisture. But the second reason, and probably the more important reason, that we're not drying it is because today we're using super soft silk tofu. So if I were to try and dry that tofu, it would completely crumble, and then we would just have crumbled bits of tofu, which is not good. So if you're using tofu, lots of folks ask about like vegetarian subs if you're trying to sub tofu out from meat. I would say if you're using tofu and you need it to be really dry, I would say make sure that you're using firm tofu. If you're using soft or silk tofu, that's going to cause some problems when you try and get it to dry, because it's going to fall apart. I always make chopping tofu so easy. Yeah, I guess lots of practice. I chop a lot of tofu, I guess. Let's see, what else? Oh yeah, for those watching on Reddit, we are working our way to a 1,500 subscriber goal by the end of the month. Hopefully we'll hit it. Pretty sure we'll hit it. If you want to help us hit that goal, though, hop over to YouTube, check some of that stuff out. Lots of folks already watching on YouTube. Yeah, Christian is watching on both Reddit and YouTube. That's stuff to do. I'm guessing one is on your phone. You can also do that too. What kind of knife is it? Today, the knife I'm using, lots of folks ask me about this knife. The knife I'm using is a vintage French chef's knife. And since so many people ask me, I should probably learn how to say it properly, but I believe it's pronounced Père Noir Nugent. And it's loosely based off of the shape and form of a more famous French chef's knife called a sabatier. So the Père Noir Nugent, this knife, I don't think you can get it anymore because it's, I don't think it's in production anymore. I think this knife, I got it at an estate sale, and I believe it's from like the 70s. But the sabatier is definitely still in production, and you can get those like at Macy's for sure. So you could definitely, if you're looking for a French chef's knife, sabatier is generally like the go-to knife. They're also like not quite as popular. Japanese knife's definitely in vogue right now, so everyone's got a Japanese knife lately. But up until pretty recently, like within like maybe the last like 10 years, even less than that, German knives were super popular. So you would see things like Wusthof knives come up a lot. And if you weren't using a Wusthof knife, you were probably using a knife that's based off of a Wusthof knife. So has this general shape and profile of a Wusthof knife. I actually even have a copy of a Wusthof, which is a Ginsu, and they look like this, which is just like a general chef's knife, kind of looks like this. They're usually 8 inches, they generally have that shape and size, and they're super common. Lately, most folks that I see, like professional chefs lately, I don't see Wusthofs or German-shaped knives even as much as I used to. Lately, I see a lot of Japanese knives, so lots of folks been like diving into Japanese knives lately, which is interesting. Yeah, just trying to be sort of, yeah, thank you, Christian. Alright, so I'm picking, this is maybe a 1/4 cup, maybe half a cup of cilantro. I just generally eyeball with cilantro. I am removing the stems because although the stems are filled with flavor, I find lots of folks ask me what I'm doing with those stems. I don't like throwing stems into stir fries or garnishes, generally because I just find that the stems are a little bit chewy, and they're not really something that I like eating, although I know that they are packed with flavor. So what I usually do is I take those stems and I save them for stalks. because they're really, really tasty. But when I use cilantro as garnish or in soups like we are today, I find that they can be a little bit chewy. So oftentimes I'll leave them out of the stock. You saw me on Reddit making pad thai. Oh yeah, I think that was maybe a couple days ago actually. Was that last week? I don't remember anymore. I feel like I recently ate pad thai. Maybe that was a couple weeks ago. I've lost track of time. Alright, so that's our cilantro. The last thing that we're going to put together today is our egg whites. So, egg whites. Egg white station, I'm getting better at this. Although it does require some attention. So, what you need when you do a proper egg white station is it requires 3 separate bowls. So, very, very important if you are trying to be very, very careful about separating your eggs. So in our case today, it's not going to be a huge deal if we get some yolks in our egg whites. But if you are trying to do things like a meringue or something that requires literally 0 yolks, so for example in a meringue, which requires a whole bunch of whipping, it won't whip into a stiff peak if there's yolks in it. So yolks at all. So if you have any yolks in your egg whites when you're doing a meringue, it's going to cause a problem with getting that stiff peak. Which means that we have to be very, very, very careful when you separate your egg whites. Today it's not super important because if we end up with a little bit of yolk, it'll be okay. But if you are being very, very careful and need to make sure that there's no egg yolks in your egg whites, you need 3 separate bowls. So what we're going to do is crack our egg over 1 egg bowl. No, I messed it up. Drop the yolk over there, egg over there. So this is what we don't want. But the reason that we do that, I'm not going to restart because it's not that big of a deal with me if we end up with yolk in our egg whites today. But the reason that we do that though is if I had done that over the same bowl, we would have had to restart, which means like if you keep doing it over the same bowl and you break a yolk, maybe your 3rd yolk or something, what you end up with is 3 wasted eggs. Whereas if I had done this and we messed up on the 1st, 2nd, or 3rd one, we would just have 1 wasted egg. So very important, 3 bowls when you do your egg yolks or egg whites. It's in an egg. No, that's 4. Ooh, yeah, salsa with cilantro. That's definitely a good go-to. What am I making? Yeah, so hello to everyone just joining. Sorry, I should introduce myself more. My name is Wesley. This is Wu Can Cook. Today we're doing a Chinese egg drop soup called Westlake soup. Westlake soup is pretty much just an egg drop soup, but with a couple of extra things going on. I believe a Chinese egg drop soup is mostly just broth and eggs going in. A Westlake soup has a few other things and definitely has more proteins involved, which I believe separates it from just your standard egg drop soup. So today we are doing an egg drop, which is a process in which we literally drop the eggs into the soup at the very, very end. But we're also adding a few other things. So mainly what sets it aside for me are the use of protein, so ground beef, also tofu. And in addition to that, we're also adding a whole bunch of other stuff. So this is shiitake mushrooms that I'm chopping up. We're also going to be adding a whole bunch of cilantro. And I believe none of that stuff appears in a traditional egg drop soup. So if you have any questions, feel free to drop your questions in the comments. I don't know everything about Westlake soup, but I know lots of stuff. If you're interested in reproducing this version of a Westlake soup yourself, I recommend hopping over to YouTube and checking out some of that stuff. Everything that I cook on stream has an associated recipe video that goes along with it. That all lives over on my YouTube channel, which is, if you're watching on Reddit, the YouTube channel at the bottom of the screen. So that's youtube.com/WuCanCook, and that's the channel down there. If you're watching on YouTube, it's the YouTube channel that you're already on, so you're already there. Good job. In addition to the recipe videos, we also have a live stream concurrently going on YouTube, which is the laptop behind me. The reason that we concurrently stream on YouTube, mainly the big reason is because we get cut off on Reddit quite a bit. But the other reason is because there's a schedule of everything that I'm going to be cooking on live stream, and that lives over on YouTube. So if you want to know in advance what I'm going to be cooking within the next couple of days, weeks, I think the next week and a half, almost 2 weeks, All of that lives over on YouTube, so you can check some of that out. Follow along, check out the stuff that you're interested in, and if you're really committed, you can pick up the ingredients that for the things that I'm going to be cooking, and you can cook along with me. Yeah, totally. Egg drop soup. Yeah, if you've done an egg drop soup before, I would definitely take a shot at Westlake soup because it's pretty much just an egg drop soup, but it has a lot more protein in it, so it's a little bit more hearty, which is why it's one of my favorite soups for sure. Yeah, ginsu. Yeah, the ginsu knife is definitely like more of a santoku, but that's like the general shape of a westhoff, which I think is a little bit smaller. I'm not super familiar with German knives. I don't ever use them. But yeah, that's also, I believe, I learned some trivia about ginsu and I can't remember it anymore. Anyway, let's see. The very last thing that I'm going to do is a quick cornstarch slurry. So if you've followed these streams before, you'll know that cornstarch slurries come up on my recipes quite a bit, on like pretty much almost every recipe, definitely every recipe that requires the use of some kind of sauce. And that's because cornstarch slurries, or cornstarch in general, is what creates thickness in Chinese food. But if you have followed before, you'll know that that is a whole lot of cornstarch. Generally, a cornstarch slurry usually has only maybe 2 tablespoons of cornstarch, and then it's dissolved in water. Today we're using, I think that's 4, almost 5 tablespoons of cornstarch. And the reason that we're using so much cornstarch is because there's so much stock in our pot. So we need quite a bit of cornstarch to thicken up our soup. So this is going to be the very, very last thing that we add to our soup. And it's going to turn everything from like a kind of loose and watery soup into a much more thick and luxurious soup. So over on our stove, I have a pot boiling with my beef stock in it. Today I'm mostly using my own homemade beef stock. If you're using stock from a bouillon, like a powdered beef stock or powdered chicken stock, I would use 6 cups of beef stock. Today I'm using, that was 4 cups of beef stock with 2 cups of water because my homemade stock tends to be a little bit thicker. Yeah, what kind of knife? Oh yeah, so totally. Someone asked that earlier. It's a French chef's knife called the Pernod Nugent. It's loosely based off, so my knife is a vintage chef's knife. I got it at an estate sale for $10 actually. I got 2 of them for $20. But it's loosely based off of a more famous French chef's knife called a sabatier. And the sabatier is definitely still in production, so if you're trying to get your hands on a French profile chef's knife, I would look into sabatiers for sure. Alright, so I'm adding, that was my garlic, ginger, and that's my mushrooms going in. And then I'm going to bring this up to a boil. We need a rolling boil here before we add our beef to the stock. My loafers, yeah. I just recently got new loafers. Here, yeah, there we go. Check out my new loafers. They're like a little bit better. I had to replace my old loafers because they had holes in them. But it was also causing me to slip in the kitchen too, so it was getting a little bit dangerous. But I had those for almost a year, totally. And I love them. Alright, so while we wait for that to boil, is there something else we're going to do? No, we're done. We're going to wait for that to boil. That will probably take another minute to come up to boil. While that happens, my name is Wesley. Hello to everyone just joining. This is Wu Can Cook. Today I'm doing a Chinese egg drop soup called Westlake soup. Westlake soup, if you're not familiar, is very, very similar to a standard egg drop soup. But it has a whole bunch of other stuff that's going on in it. So I'm pretty sure standard egg drop soup is pretty much just broth plus eggs going into the soup. Today, the Westlake soup has a few extra things in it. So in particular, we're using tofu and ground beef, as well as cilantro and shiitake mushrooms. I think none of those things generally appear in a egg drop soup, because I'm pretty sure that an egg drop soup is just really, really straightforward eggs and soup. If you've ever done an egg drop soup, this is definitely one that I recommend you check out because it's super easy and like basically just an egg drop soup with a couple of extra steps. And in addition to that, because it has so much extra protein, it makes it super, super hearty, and definitely like one of the reasons why it's my favorite soup, because it's super, super hearty and you can totally eat it just for dinner. So if you're interested in this particular recipe, I recommend hopping over to my YouTube channel, which if you're watching on Reddit is the YouTube channel at the bottom of the screen, which is youtube.com/woocancook. We're working our way to 1,500 subscribers by the end of the month. If you want to help us hit that subscriber goal, I definitely would love it if you hopped over and checked it out. But only subscribe if you're interested. Don't subscribe if you're not interested in stuff, because I don't want to spam you. But if you're interested in stuff like that, definitely check it out. We have a couple of series that are going on the YouTube channel. I have a whole series that's devoted to just reproducing foods from restaurants in the San Francisco Bay Area. So I did a pad see ew from Ni Cha Thai in Oakland. This soup is based off of a restaurant in San Francisco called Dragon House, which is no longer there anymore, but was there in the 90s, and I used to eat there when I was a kid a lot. Tomorrow we're releasing another lion's head meatball, which is a Shanghainese styled braised meatball. That's coming out on Friday. That's also based off of Dragon House in San Francisco. And lots of other stuff coming up soon for that series. There's a second series that's just entirely devoted to Chinese American food. So I have lots of fun doing those. Because essentially what we're doing is deconstructing Chinese American food, taking it apart and kind of looking at like what are the American things that got added to Chinese food and why were they added, and sort of like what happened to Chinese food when it came to America and what were Chinese people doing to it to adjust it so that American people would eat it. So there's a whole bunch of Panda Express recipes. So if you notice, I cook Panda Express hacks a lot. That's because there's a whole bunch of recipes that I've written that are devoted to Panda Express. So we hacked their General Tso's chicken, honey sesame chicken, kung pao chicken, Beijing beef, something else too, and I can't remember. So lots of stuff like that. Generally when I do that, when I do Chinese American foods, I will deconstruct it, take it apart, see what the American qualities are, and then remove those American qualities and reconstruct it as if it were traditional Chinese food, and see what that looks like. So what does like General Tso's chicken look like if it didn't have any American qualities to it? So like how would you approach like Chinese fried chicken if it weren't like American? So like the American style of frying chicken is very, very different from say like a tempura batter. So how you fry Southern fried chicken looks very, very different from how you fry like tempura. So we kind of like deconstruct that, look at stuff like that, and then sort of like replace things. Like lots of times when I'm hacking Chinese American food, I find myself removing a lot of sugar and then replacing it with sweet things or like sweet elements like black vinegar or dark soy sauce, stuff like that, fish sauce. All of these things contain lots of sugar, but are not necessarily just like straightforward sweet. So we get pretty close to like the general intent of a dish without actually being super, super Americanized. So. Oh, Dolly, your account got deactivated. Yeah, definitely. Just make a new one. You can have infinite YouTube channels. I think I have like, I lost count, but I think I have like 17 or 18 YouTube accounts. I have too many. It's gotten to the point where I can't keep track of them anymore. Oh, you don't know how to? Yeah, just make a new Gmail account. So basically just a new inbox. And then that's attached to your YouTube channel. Everyone upvote me. Yeah, totally. So yeah, if you're interested in stuff like that, definitely hop over to YouTube, check some of that stuff out. We're also concurrently live streaming on YouTube, which is where this laptop is going. Everything that we concurrently, so everything that I stream on live stream is posted in a schedule that lives over on the YouTube channel. So if for the folks who are watching on YouTube, they already knew what I was going to be cooking today. They probably would have known it probably almost 2 weeks in advance. Probably even earlier than I knew what it would be, because I forget what I'm supposed to be cooking a lot. So if you're interested in what I'm going to be cooking next, or if you're interested in reproducing some of the things that I cook, definitely check it out on YouTube. Lots of fun stuff over there. All right. You're eating salami without heating it. Salami is a cured meat. You'll be okay. So cured meat, you technically don't have to cook cured meat, although it's very, very common to cook it. But the curing process removes all of the technical danger. Although I don't know that raw uncured salami is tasty, but it's not technically dangerous. Don't quote me on that, though. All right, so my ground beef, I'm adding it very, very slowly. Basically what I'm doing is adding it in little bits. And that's because as soon as it hits this water, or as soon as it hits my beef stock, it's going to start cooking. So if I add the whole thing in one chunk and just sort of dump the meat into the pot, we would have one giant block of ground beef, which we don't want. We want this to be broken down into small little bits. So in order to make sure that I have little tiny bits of ground beef, I'm adding it in very, very light chunks. You will also notice, if you followed these streams before, that we're treating the way we introduce ingredients very, very differently from the way that we would have approached a wok stir fry. And that's because moisture behaves very, very differently in a soup. So in a wok, usually if I'm doing a wok stir fry, I would have been a lot more careful not to drop any of that liquid marinade into my wok. And that's because in a wok, we're generally trying to be very careful not to introduce extra moisture to a wok that we don't need to have in the wok. In a soup, that doesn't really matter because the whole thing is moisture. So I'm just going to go ahead and dump all of it in. Plus, in addition to that, all of that marinade is packed with flavor. So ideally, in a wok stir fry, we could also introduce that too because it's got a whole bunch of flavor in it. But in a wok stir fry, we try and hold that back as much as possible. Otherwise, you end up with super soggy stir fry. But in a soup, you can totally dump that in. All right, so you'll notice, so our pot was at a rolling boil right before I dropped this beef in, and then it came down to not boiling anymore. And that's because beef, ground meat, is cold. So when you introduce cold things to hot water, it drops the temperature. So in order to make sure that the next thing that we add properly cooks, I'm gonna bring that back up to temperature and give it maybe 30 seconds to come back up. Did I marinate the ground beef? Yes, that was the first thing that I did. So, great question. No send me the release. The reason that our marinade looks a little bit different today is because it's super heavy. So when I do wok stir fries, for example, you'll notice that lots of times my marinades are really light. So it's basically just soy sauce. My marinade today was super heavy because there's nothing else that's going into the stock. So we used 4 tablespoons of soy sauce, 2 tablespoons of fish sauce, 2 tablespoons sesame oil, pinch of white pepper, 2 tablespoons of rice vinegar, and 2 tablespoons of Shaoxing wine. All of that right into the marinade. So in a wok stir fry, probably most of that would have been straight into the wok in the sauce. Cool. Next up, I'm adding my tofu. And once that tofu's in the wok, once the tofu's in the pot, you want to start treating this very gently because that tofu is going to be really fragile. So now that it's in there, you want to start. You don't want to be aggressively stirring your pot anymore because you really want to make sure that that tofu doesn't break apart. Yeah, reducing the pure sugar. Yeah, totally. So that's I've found is like neon sparkler glitter. That's a great username. I found that like that's definitely the quality of Chinese American food is that there's just a lot of like really pure sugar and just very forward sweetness. So lots of times what I'll do is I'll like remove. Sometimes in recipes I'll see like up to 1/4 cup or more of just plain brown sugar, or sometimes even honey. Lots of times what I'll do is I'll remove that, maybe like pare it down to like a tablespoon of sugar, and then replace it with things like I use sweet chili sauce a lot in replace of honey because it's a little bit more like interesting in sweetness. All right, so the last 2 things that we haven't added, you'll notice that I also haven't added any salt yet. Very important with things like soups, that you want to add that salt at the very end because you don't know what salinity you're at. So once the soup is done reducing, then we can start adding that stuff. But until it's done reducing, don't season. Wait until the very end. Right now I'm adding my egg whites, but I'm adding it very slowly. So what we're doing is I'm slowly stirring our pot so that our soup is in constant motion. And then I'm very slowly adding maybe like a drop or 2 of egg white at a time. So if you've ever made a egg drop soup, this is probably the part that you're more familiar with, which is literally dropping egg into a soup. What's going to happen is, as I continue to drop this egg white into our soup, we're going to start developing these nice wisps of egg white, which is probably the quality that you're most familiar with if you've ever had an egg drop soup. So I think you could see it. We have all of that nice wisps of egg white starting to form in our soup. And eggs cook very, very quickly. So pretty much as soon as it hits that hot water or hot stock, it's starting to cook. And we're doing this very slowly because we don't also want to drop all in at once. Because if we were to drop all of this in at once, it would basically just cook into one clump of egg yolk or egg white. So we're doing it very, very gradually because as soon as that egg white hits the soup, it starts cooking. So if we dropped everything in at once, we would have just one giant clump of cooked egg, which we don't want. That ought to do it. Alright, so you'll notice all those nice wisps of egg, and that's where our egg drop comes from. And I wish this camera looked better. A best dish to cook for a date. Usually my go-tos are some kind of pasta, because they're fancy. Some kind of pasta, because it's super fancy. I love doing bologneses for dates. Is my wok 12 or 14? I believe it's 14. It's very, very wide. I don't remember the measurements. I'm pretty sure it's 14 though. All right, next up I'm dropping in my cornstarch slurry. And you'll notice that as soon as I drop in that cornstarch, our soup starts getting a little bit thicker and a little bit more close to the thickness that you're looking for in a soup. So before it was a little bit loose and watery, and now it is a lot more thick. Lady and the Tramp, yeah, totally. So I usually do either a pasta carbonara, which was done with spaghetti, or a bolognese, which is done with fettuccine. Or I usually do it with fettuccine, at least. Definitely not an expert at Italian cooking, but I also do like a lot of sinful things in my pasta, like adding garlic to carbonara, which is really, really tasty. So. Hey, so chill, yeah, totally. Oh, candles, hell yeah. Definitely candles on your date. Alright, so last thing I'm adding is my cilantro. We're adding our cilantro super, super late for a very specific reason, and that's because as cilantro heats up, what will happen is it starts becoming a little bit slimy and translucent. So if you're really committed to it, you could even hold this back and then add the cilantro on top when you serve it. But what's going to happen is probably by the time I'm done eating, cilantro, not parsley, but probably by the time we're done eating, that cilantro is going to start becoming really, really translucent and a little bit slimy. So we want to be careful not to let that overcook. So, and that's the reason why you generally don't see cilantro used in like heat. It's generally a garnish. What am I drinking? It's a rye. I forget what kind of rye. I keep forgetting the name of this rye. Sagamore. I'm drinking Sagamore. A friend of mine gave it to me. It's really tasty. Alright, so we're finally done adding stuff, so I am going to finally give a pinch of salt. And then taste for seasoning. If it needs anything, add it. Soup's probably one of the most tricky things, or not tricky, but like runs through some of the, like you need to understand flavor palette, you know, so. Taste it and then add what it needs. Mine needs a little bit of soy sauce and a little bit of fish sauce. The reason that I'm adding these two things is because it's a little bit lacking in umami. So I'm adding a pinch of salt and then soy sauce and fish sauce because that's where our umami flavor profiles are going to come from. So I'm adding a pinch of those two things. Yeah, that did it. All right, so why salt? Oh, damn it, stupid thing. The reason that I use salt, I used all three because it needs a little bit of saltiness, and we're not actually adding that much fish sauce or soy sauce. So although fish sauce is definitely salty, and so is soy sauce, it's not. We only added like maybe a tablespoon or two, so you're not actually going to get quite as much saltiness. So if we were doing that in a wok stir fry, that would definitely have been enough. I could have definitely gotten away without using salt. But in this case, there's so much liquid in the stock already that you're not really going to get quite as much saltiness as you are going to get quite a bit of umami though. Alright, so I've always eaten Westlake soup over rice. I'm pretty sure that was just something that my mom was making us do in order to stretch the soup. But it's how I've always known how to eat this. So if you're following like how to do a traditional Westlake soup, I'm pretty sure that Westlake soup does not traditionally have rice in it. But that's how I've always done it when I was a kid. Nope, wrong one. All right, that is our soup. What camera am I looking at? Well, I was going to get its GoPro, which I borrowed from my dad, which I have to give back soon. But it's not working. It's a piece of junk. So really, any cheap camera. It doesn't have to be super fancy. But I have a cheap Chinese webcam that's really not cutting it. That's why if you're watching on YouTube, the stove camera on Reddit is pretty good, but the one on YouTube is this shitty webcam, which is why it looks like it's kind of bright, like really, really bright. Not a lot of contrast. That's why I'm trying to replace it. It's also the reason, so it's the same camera that's connected to these face cameras, which is why it keeps freezing, because the OBS keeps confusing the two, and then they freeze all the time. It's really annoying. So that's my Westlake soup. Thank you everyone for tuning in and sticking around. And we finished this in almost 45 minutes. I know a couple folks gave some airtime on Reddit, so thank you for the gold and silver. I definitely hope that you give this a try. Oh yeah, people keep asking me to taste this, and I always forget to taste it. Yeah, it's really, really great. I think it needs a little bit more salt, so I'm probably going to add a little bit more salt. But other than that, I think it's right on point. It's also, the beef stock is speaking a lot. I think a lot of that homemade beef stock is coming through. It would taste very different if I was doing it with chicken bouillon. So if you're getting into making soups, definitely try and make a beef stock. B, yeah, you came a little bit too late. We're about to lose the Reddit stream. But the YouTube stream is going to keep going, so if you want to stick around and hang out on the YouTube channel, definitely pop over to YouTube. Thank you everyone for hanging out. My name is Wesley. This is Wu Can Cook. If you're interested in the things that I'm cooking, I definitely recommend hopping over to YouTube and checking out the recipes for everything that I cook. Pretty much everything that's done on the live stream, including the soup for sure, lives in a recipe over on YouTube. So over on YouTube is where I keep all of the recipe videos. Those recipe videos usually move a little bit slower. They also take a little bit more time to talk about like some of the decision making that goes behind what I'm doing when I write a recipe. So why I add certain things, why I don't add some things. Lots of times that's what's going on in those YouTube videos. So if you're interested in stuff like that, definitely hop over to YouTube. We have a couple series that are going right now. There's a whole series that's devoted to just reproducing Chinese American foods and deconstructing Chinese American food and what happens to Chinese food when it came to America. There's another series that's just devoted to food from TV and another series that's just devoted to food from restaurants in the San Francisco Bay Area. So in addition to that, that's also where the concurrent live stream is. So there's a schedule of everything that I'm going to be cooking soon. So 12 seconds, yeah, right on time. Thank you everyone on Reddit. We're gonna lose you. If you want to stick around, I'm gonna be answering some questions on YouTube. So see you soon. Cool. Hello to everyone still here on YouTube. I think we're actually pretty much done cooking, so we nailed it. If you have any questions, feel free to drop your questions in the comments. I know that I miss questions a lot, so if I missed it and I didn't see it or something, feel free to repeat it and I'll do my best to answer everyone. I'll also generally will try and circle back and answer everyone if I missed anything too. I'm gonna start cleaning up, and I'm gonna switch the mic packs off, but feel free to drop your questions in the chat and I'll do my best to answer. I won't be all have to answer in the chat, but I can definitely still answer that. I'm gonna spin some tunes too, so stick around and listen to some music. All right, thanks everyone. See you soon.
And now that you got what you came for, no sign of a soul. Yeah, take it over, baby. Don't you see the wine is coming in? And I yeah. Make me the man I know. Somebody's gotta be it. Somebody's gotta be it. Give it, baby. I said, I lose my I can find it. I can't leave it out there. Do you want it? So I can find it. Give it, baby. And I lose my baby. I can find it. Give it out there. Do you want it? Everybody's getting alright.